The stench of unwashed bodies and recycled air hit Cale Thorne like a physical blow as he entered the rusty bolt cantina. Kepler Station's main watering hole lived up to its reputation, a dingy den where miners, smugglers, and worse gathered to drink away their credits and their consciences. The human engineer pulled his work jacket tighter, trying to blend in with the crowd of aliens hunched over their drinks. He'd only come here for information about a faulty atmospheric processor, but the scene unfolding near the bar made his blood run cold. A massive Vorthak slaver, his scaled hide glistening with sweat and synthetic alcohol, was gesticulating wildly at a bottle of amber liquid. His voice carried over the ambient noise, words slurred but intent clear. Good price, very good price, for both. Behind the alien stood two small figures that made Cale's heart sink. They couldn't be more than 14 or 15. Young girls with the distinctive silver-blue skin and large dark eyes of the Ashanti race. Their clothes were little more than rags, and they pressed close together, trembling visibly. One had her arm protectively around the other, and both flinched whenever the Vorthak moved. "Come on, Grix," laughed a human miner at the bar. "What would I do with a couple of alien kids? I need workers, not pets." The Vorthak, called Grix, swayed dangerously, pointing at the bottle again. "Not kids. Ashanti. Very rare now. Very valuable. Only cost one bottle good liquor." Kyle felt sick. The Ashanti homeworld had been glass 3 years ago during the Hegemony Wars. These girls were probably survivors of slave raids, passed from one owner to another like cargo. And now this drunk alien was trying to trade them for alcohol. Around the cantina, other patrons watched with amusement or indifference. This was Kepler Station, a lawless mining colony where anything could be bought or sold if you had the credits or the firepower. Nobody here would lift a finger to help two alien girls, especially not Ashanti ones. "Tell you what," the human miner said, finishing his drink. "Find me when you're sober. Maybe we can work something out then." As the miner walked away, Grix snarled and grabbed the smaller girl's arm, making her cry out, "Someone buy. Someone must buy. Need credits for fuel." Kyle's hands clenched into fists. He was a maintenance engineer, not a fighter. Taking on a Vorthak slaver would be suicide, especially in a place like this where violence was settled with blasters, not words. But watching those terrified children. "I'll take that trade." The words left his mouth before he'd fully realized he was speaking. Every head in the immediate area turned toward him, and Cale felt his heart hammering against his ribs. But he stepped forward, pulling a bottle of synthetic whiskey from his jacket, his weekly ration, saved for special occasions that never seemed to come. Grix's small eyes lit up as he spotted the bottle. "You want both girls? Good choice. Ashanti, very smart, very useful." "Just the trade," Kyle said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "The bottle for both of them." Several aliens nearby began to chuckle. A Tellarite merchant shook his head. "Humans," he wheezed. "Always making emotional decisions. Those two won't last a week in the mines." "Who said anything about the mines?" Cale replied, extending the bottle toward Grix. The Vorthak snatched it eagerly, already working at the seal. "Deal. Very good deal." He shoved the girls forward roughly. "Your problem now, human." The older girl, she couldn't be more than 16, looked up at Cale with eyes full of terror and defiance. She said something in rapid Ashanti to her companion, who shook her head frantically. Neither spoke Galactic Standard, but their fear was universal. "It's okay," Kyle said softly, holding up his hands to show he was unarmed. "You're safe now." They didn't understand his words, but something in his tone must have registered. The older girl stepped slightly in front of the younger one, still protective but no longer backing away. Around them, the cantina's patrons were already losing interest. Grix had stumbled to a corner booth with his prize, and the usual din of conversation resumed. Just another transaction in a place where sentient beings were treated like commodities. Cale looked down at the two girls. His responsibility now, for better or worse. They stood close together, supporting each other, watching him with wary eyes. Their clothes were torn and filthy, their silver-blue skin marked with bruises and malnutrition. But there was intelligence in their gaze, and something else that the slave markets hadn't managed to break: hope. "My name is Kyle," he said gently, pointing to himself. Then he gestured toward the cantina's exit. "Home?" The older girl hesitated for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She said something to her companion in their musical language, and together they took a tentative step toward him. As they walked, out of the rusty bolt and into the harsh artificial light of Kepler Station's main corridor, Kyle wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He had a modest engineering position, a small quarters unit, and barely enough credits to support himself. Now he was responsible for 2 traumatized alien children who didn't speak his language and probably didn't trust him any further than they could throw him. But as he glanced back at them, still holding hands, still afraid, but following him nonetheless, he knew he'd made the right choice. 1 bottle of cheap liquor seemed like a small price to pay for 2 lives. He just hoped he was worthy of the trust they were placing in him. 3 weeks had passed since Kale brought Zira and Kes home, and he was beginning to question every decision he'd ever made. The girls barely ate, spoke only to each other in hushed Ashanti whispers, and spent most of their time huddled together in the corner of his small living area. Every sudden noise, a door closing, the ventilation system cycling, even his own footsteps, sent them into visible panic. Kale had tried everything he could think of. He'd shown them around his modest quarters, pointing to various objects and saying their names in Galactic Standard. He'd left food outside the makeshift sleeping area he'd set up for them, hoping they'd eat when he wasn't watching. He'd even attempted to learn basic Ashanti phrases from the station's linguistic database, though his pronunciation was apparently so terrible that it only made them more nervous. "Maybe I should contact the refugee services," he muttered to himself, as he prepared for another day at the mining complex. But he knew what that meant: bureaucratic processing, separation, and likely deportation to some overcrowded refugee camp. The Ashanti had no homeworld left to return to. When he returned that evening, he found something different: a small mechanical device on his workbench. An atmospheric regulator that had been giving him trouble for weeks was sitting in pieces, but organized pieces. Someone had disassembled it with surgical precision, laying out each component in perfect order. "Zira? Kes?" he called softly. The older girl, Zira, emerged from their corner, her dark eyes cautious but no longer terrified. She approached the workbench and pointed to the regulator, then to herself. Her meaning was clear. She had done this. Kale examined the disassembly work. It was masterful, better than anything he could have managed. Every component was clean, sorted, and ready for inspection. The girl had an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that would take most engineers years to develop. "This is incredible," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "You have a gift?" Zira didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. For the first time since he had brought them home, she almost smiled. Over the following days, a routine developed. Kyle would leave broken or malfunctioning devices on his workbench, and Zira would work on them while he was away. Meanwhile, Kes began showing interest in the various data pads and linguistic programs scattered around his quarters. She would watch the holographic displays with intense concentration, mouthing words silently. The breakthrough came during the 4th week. Kale returned from work to find Kes standing by his communication console, tears streaming down her face. She was listening to a news broadcast about Ashanti refugees being turned away from various systems. "Hey," he said gently, approaching slowly. "It's okay." "No, okay," Kes said haltingly, the words thick with her accent but unmistakably galactic. "Standard. My people, no home, no safe place." Kyle's heart clenched. She'd been learning his language, trying to understand the world that had been so cruel to her people. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "This is your home now." Kes looked at him with those large, dark eyes. "Why? Why you help? We nothing to you." "Because it was the right thing to do," Kale replied simply. "And you're not nothing. You're family now." The word family seemed to break something inside her. She began to cry harder. But these weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of hope, of finally belonging somewhere. Zira appeared from the workshop area, concerned by her friend's distress. When she saw Kale kneeling beside Kes, offering comfort rather than demands, something shifted in her expression too. She spoke rapidly in Ashanti, and Kes translated haltingly. She says, "Thank you. For food, for safety, for—" She struggled with the concept, for not wanting payment. "There is no payment," Kyle said, looking at both girls. "This is your home. My home is your home." That night, for the first time, they ate dinner together at his small table instead of hiding in their corner. The conversation was stilted, a mixture of basic galactic standard, simple gestures, and the occasional Ashanti phrase. But it was conversation nonetheless. As the weeks continued, their confidence grew. Zira began working alongside Kale on more complex repairs, her mechanical intuition proving invaluable. She could diagnose problems that baffled him and find solutions that were both elegant and efficient. Her work was so impressive that other miners began requesting her assistance with their equipment. Kes threw herself into language acquisition with remarkable intensity. Within 2 months, she was not only fluent in Galactic Standard, but had begun learning Tellarite, Vorthak, and several other species' languages. Her linguistic gifts made her invaluable when Kale had to negotiate with non-human contractors and suppliers, but perhaps more importantly, they were healing. The flinching decreased, replaced by curious interest in their surroundings. Smiles became more frequent. Laughter, tentative at first, then genuine, began to fill the quarters that had once echoed with frightened whispers. One evening, as they worked together on a particularly complex mining drone, Zira looked up at Kale and spoke in careful Galactic Standard. "You good man, Kale Thorne. You save us not for profit, but for—" She searched for the word. "For kindness." "You saved me too," Kale replied, and he meant it. Before they arrived, his life had been routine, purposeless. Work, sleep, repeat. Now every day brought new challenges, small victories, and the warm satisfaction of watching two broken souls slowly become whole again. But their growing visibility was starting to attract the wrong kind of attention. Several times, Kale had noticed unsavory characters watching them in the corridors, and he'd heard whispers about the human with the Ashanti pets. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and he had a feeling their peaceful existence was about to be tested. 6 months after the trade in the Rusty Bolt, Kale's modest quarters had been transformed into something resembling a real home. Zira had fashioned a workbench from salvaged materials, complete with an impressive array of tools she'd either repaired or invented. Kes had covered one wall with learning materials, linguistic charts, cultural guides, and news feeds from across the galaxy. The space that had once echoed with fearful silence now hummed with purposeful activity. The change in the girls was remarkable. Zira had grown more confident, her mechanical skills earning respect throughout the station. When Chief Engineer Valdez couldn't figure out why the main air recycling system kept failing, it was Zira who discovered that the problem wasn't mechanical at all. Microfractures in the housing were causing harmonic resonance that threw off the calibration sensors. Her solution was elegant and permanent. "That girl's got a gift," Valdez told Kale over drinks at the station's more respectable cantina. "My own apprentices couldn't have caught that. You thinking about getting her certified?" Kale nodded. "She deserves official recognition. Both of them do." Kes had become indispensable in her own way. Her linguistic abilities had evolved beyond simple translation. She could read the subtle cultural cues that made negotiations successful. When a delegation of Rigelian traders threatened to cancel a major contract over what they claimed was a translation error, Kes discovered the real issue. The automated translator had used a formal dialect that the Rigelians found insulting. She mediated the dispute in their own language, complete with the proper honorifics, and saved the deal. "Your translator is better than our diplomatic corps," Ambassador Thex had told Kale afterward. "Where did you find her?" "She found me," Kale had replied, which was true enough. Their growing reputation brought prosperity. Kale's engineering services were in high demand, And with Zira's innovations and Kess's communication skills, they could charge premium rates. For the first time in his life, Kale had more credits than he needed for basic survival. But success on a place like Kepler Station always came with a price. "You're making some people nervous," warned Jorik, a grizzled Tellarite who ran the station's black market information network. They were meeting in a maintenance tunnel away from listening devices. "Word is getting around about your associates." "They're not associates," Kyle said firmly. "They're family." Jorik's tusks gleamed in the dim light. "Family, employees, property, doesn't matter to the people asking questions. Security Chief Drax has been making inquiries about unregistered aliens living in residential quarters." Kale's blood ran cold. Drax was notorious for his creative interpretations of station regulations, usually in ways that filled his own pockets. What kind of inquiries? The expensive kind. Someone's been filling his ear with stories about valuable Ashanti working without proper documentation. He's talking about conducting wellness checks to ensure compliance with station safety protocols. The threat was clear. Drax would manufacture some regulatory violation, demand bribes for overlooking it, and if those bribes weren't paid, the girls would disappear into the bureaucratic maze that swallowed inconvenient people on frontier stations. That evening, Kale sat both girls down and explained the situation as gently as he could. Their faces went pale, old fears resurfacing. "We hide?" Zira asked, her voice small. "We run?" Kess added. "No," Kyle said firmly. "We prepare." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked frantically to establish their legitimacy. Kyle filed adoption papers, claiming the girls as his legal dependents. He purchased formal work permits, registered them for basic education credits, and even arranged for medical checkups to create an official paper trail. Every bureaucratic box that could be checked, they checked. But bureaucracy moved slowly, and corruption moved fast. The knock came at 0300 hours, the universal time when station security preferred to conduct their business. Kale opened the door to find Drax flanked by 2 armed deputies, their weapons conspicuously visible. "Citizen Thorne," Drax said with false courtesy, "we've received reports of safety violations in your quarters. We're here to conduct an inspection." "Of course," Kale replied, stepping aside, "though I'm not sure what violations you're referring to." Drax was a heavy-set human with the look of someone who'd seen too much and cared too little. His eyes immediately fixed on Zira and Kess, who had emerged from their sleeping area in nightclothes, clearly frightened. "These would be the unregistered aliens we've heard about," Drax said, making notes on a datapad. "Living in residential quarters without proper documentation, engaging in unlicensed commercial activity." "They have documentation," Kale interrupted. "Producing the permits. All properly filed and approved." Drax barely glanced at the papers. "These are temporary permits, insufficient for long-term residents. I'm afraid we'll need to take them into custody for proper processing." Processing was a euphemism everyone understood. The girls would be held in detention, where they could be sold to the highest bidder, or simply disappear. It was a common enough fate for aliens without powerful protectors. "The permits are valid for another 6 months," Kale said carefully. "And I've filed for permanent guardian status." "Filed, yes, but not approved." Drax smiled, coldly. "These individuals represent a clear safety hazard. They'll need to come with us." One of the deputies moved toward Zira, and she instinctively stepped back. The man's hand went to his stunner, and Kale saw the situation spiraling toward violence. "Wait," he said quickly. "Surely we can discuss this reasonably. I'm willing to pay whatever fines are necessary." "The fine for housing unregistered aliens is 10,000 credits, Drax said promptly. "Plus processing fees. Let's call it 15,000. It was extortion, plain and simple. 15,000 credits was more than most station residents made in a year. But as Kale looked at Zira and Kess, his family, he realized he'd pay anything to keep them safe. "I need time to arrange the transfer," he said. 24 hours, Drax replied. "After that, we'll have to proceed with standard processing." After they left, Kale slumped into his chair, mind racing. He had maybe 8,000 credits in his account, and no legal recourse. Drax owned the security apparatus, and complaint procedures were just bureaucratic theater. "Kale," Kes said softly, "we go. You no pay. Too much money." "Absolutely not," he replied firmly. "We'll find another way." But as he looked at their frightened faces, he wondered if he was being foolishly optimistic. Sometimes the corrupt system won, and good people suffered for it. However, he'd underestimated something important. The bonds they'd built weren't just with him, but with the entire community they'd helped over the past months. And on the frontier, those bonds could be stronger than any law. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Chief Engineer Valdez stood at Kyle's door, his weathered face grim but determined. "Heard about your trouble with Drax," he said without preamble. "Can't let that stand. I appreciate the concern, but no buts. That girl of yours saved our atmospheric system. Could have been a catastrophic failure, hundreds dead. Station management knows it even if they won't say it publicly." Valdez held out a credit chip. "This is from the engineering department. 3,000 credits. It's not charity. It's payment for services rendered." Before Kale could respond, his communication panel chimed. Ambassador Thex appeared on the holographic display, his Rigelian features showing unusual concern. "Mr. Thorne, I've learned of your difficulties. The trade agreement your translator facilitated saved my government considerable embarrassment. We are prepared to offer a cultural exchange grant of 5,000 credits for continuing linguistic services." Throughout the day, similar offers arrived. The Tellarite merchant whose cargo hauler Zira had repaired contributed 2,000 credits. A group of miners whose equipment failures she'd prevented pooled together another 1,500. Even, small contributions came in, 50 credits here, 100 there, from people whose lives had been touched by the girl's work. By evening, they had enough to pay Drax's extortion with credits to spare. But Kes had been monitoring station communications and her linguistic skills had picked up something troubling. "Kyle," she said urgently, "they not take money. I hear Drax talking. He say money good, but girls worth more. He planned to take credits, and take us too." Zira nodded grimly. "Heard same thing. They think we valuable. Want to sell us to collectors who pay big money for rare species." Kyle felt his blood turn to ice. Of course, Drax would take the bribe money, and then claim the girls had committed some new violation requiring their immediate detention. It was a perfect scheme and completely legal under the station's corrupt system. "Then we don't give them the chance," Kale said. "We leave. Tonight." "Where we go?" Zira asked. "There's a freight hauler leaving for the Centauri system in 4 hours. Captain Torres owes me a favor. I fixed his hyperdrive motivator when no one else could. He'll take us if we can get to the docking bay. But getting there wouldn't be easy. Drax would have the corridors watched and their quarters were certainly under surveillance. They needed a distraction, and they needed to move fast. The solution came from an unexpected source. Jorik contacted them through a secured channel, his gravelly voice filled with determination. "Been thinking about what you did for those girls," he said. "Reminded me why I came to the frontier in the first place. To get away from the kind of corruption that treats people like commodities. I'm calling in some favors." At precisely 2100 hours, chaos erupted across Kepler station. A malfunction in the main computer system triggered emergency alerts in 12 different sections simultaneously. Security personnel rushed to respond to reports of hull breaches, fire alerts, and reactor irregularities, all of which turned out to be false alarms caused by cascading system failures. In the confusion, 3 figures slipped through maintenance tunnels toward the docking bay. Zira had memorized the station's technical schematics, guiding them through passages that avoided the main corridors. Kes monitored security communications, alerting them to patrol locations and response times. "They almost made it. Stop right there." Drax's voice echoed through the docking bay as they emerged from the service tunnel, just 50 meters from Captain Torres's ship. The security chief stood with 4 armed deputies, having apparently anticipated their escape route. "Going somewhere, Thorne?" Drax asked mockingly. "Trying to flee with stolen property?" They're not property, Kyle replied, stepping protectively, in front of the girls. They're people. They're aliens without proper documentation, and you're interfering with a security investigation. That's grounds for detention pending trial. The deputies raised their weapons, and Kyle realized they were trapped. Behind them, the service tunnel was their only escape route, but it would take them back into the heart of the station where more security waited. Ahead, armed men blocked their path to freedom. Then Zira whispered something urgent in Ashanti, and Kes nodded. They both looked at Kyle with determination in their eyes. Trust us, Kes said simply. Before he could ask what they meant, both girls moved. Zira sprinted toward a maintenance panel while Kes began shouting in multiple languages. Not random words, but specific technical commands in the tongues of the various alien workers throughout the station. The docking bay's lights cut out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but by then, Zira had reached the environmental controls. Her mechanical intuition let her manipulate systems she'd never seen before, triggering a localized atmospheric disturbance that filled the bay with dense vapor. In the confusion, with visibility reduced to mere meters and alarms blaring, Kale felt small hands grab his arms and pull him forward. The girls guided him through the chaos with supernatural precision, their enhanced senses letting them navigate where human eyes failed. Weapons fire erupted behind them, wild shots fired at shadows and vapor. Shouts of confusion echoed off the metal walls as security personnel stumbled around blindly. Here. Captain Torres's voice cut through the noise. This way. They stumbled up the cargo ramp as the freighter's engines began their startup sequence. Behind them, the vapor was beginning to clear, and Drax's angry bellowing grew louder. Go, 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 Torres shouted, and the ship lifted off with its cargo bay still sealing. As Kepler station fell away below them, Kyle collapsed into a cargo container, adrenaline leaving him shaky. Zira and Kes sat beside him, equally exhausted but triumphant. How did you know that would work? He asked. Station workers always complain about environmental systems, Zira explained. I listen, learn weak points, and maintenance crews all species use same basic commands, Kes added. Just different languages. I know many languages. Kyle looked at them with amazement and pride. They had saved themselves, and him, using the very skills that had made them targets in the first place. The girls he'd rescued from slavery had become his rescuers in return. Where we go now? Zira asked. Somewhere safe, Kale promised. Somewhere we can build a real life together. As the stars wheeled past the viewport, he realized that the storm had passed. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. 8 months later, Kale stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, watching the sunrise paint the rings of Kepler 442b in shades of gold and crimson. The mining platform orbited a gas giant in the Centauri system, far from the lawless frontier, where their troubles had begun. Here, colonial administration maintained actual order, and corruption was the exception rather than the rule. The new atmospheric processors are running at 97% efficiency, Zira reported, joining him at the viewport. Her tool belt was custom-made now, filled with devices she'd designed herself. At 17, she held official certification as a Level 5 systems engineer, a rank that typically took decades to achieve. And the Proximan delegation confirmed their contract terms, Kes added, appearing with a data pad full of translation work. Her linguistic skills had evolved beyond interpretation. She now specialized in xenocultural communication theory, helping prevent the misunderstandings that could spark interspecies conflicts. They had built something remarkable on Haven Station. Thorn Engineering Solutions had quickly become the most sought-after technical consultancy in the sector. Their reputation for solving impossible problems had spread throughout the colonial systems, bringing clients from across the galaxy. But more importantly, they had built a home. Their living quarters were spacious now, filled with the accumulated treasures of their travels, art from a dozen worlds, books in 20 languages, mechanical curiosities that Zira had collected and repaired. The sterile functionality of their old quarters on Kepler Station had given way to warmth and personality. "Kale," Kess said, setting down her pad. "Transport arriving. The refugees from Vega Colony." He nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came with these moments. 6 months ago, they'd started the Haven Foundation, a private organization dedicated to helping displaced persons, particularly those from endangered species. The Ashanti weren't the only race facing extinction in a galaxy where war and slavery were common currencies. They walked together to the docking bay, where a battered transport ship was settling onto the landing pad. The viewport showed faces pressed against the transparent steel, aliens of various species, all wearing the same expression of desperate hope that Zira and Kess had once carried. "How many this time?" Kale asked the transport captain, a grizzled human named Rodriguez who volunteered his ship for these missions. 43, Rodriguez replied. Mostly Viridians whose homeworld got strip-mined. Few others mixed in. Some Rigelian political refugees, a family of Deltans whose colony got raided by slavers. As the passengers disembarked, Kale saw his own story repeated in their faces. The fear, the uncertainty, the fragile hope that maybe this time they'd found safety. Zira and Kess moved among them with practiced efficiency, offering reassurance. In whatever languages they spoke, the Haven Foundation had rescued over 300 individuals in the past year. They provided temporary housing, job training, legal assistance, and most importantly, a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. Some stayed on Haven Station, contributing their skills to the growing community. Others moved on to established colonies or found family elsewhere in the galaxy. "The Viridian children will need educational assessments," Kess said, switching seamlessly between galactic standard and the musical tones of Viridian speech as she comforted a frightened family. "I'll run diagnostics on their environmental requirements," Zira added, already analyzing the newcomers' physiological needs. "Viridians need higher humidity than standard station atmosphere." Watching them work, Kale felt the same pride he'd experienced that first day when they'd begun to trust him, but now it was multiplied by the knowledge of what they'd accomplished together. The girls he'd traded a bottle of liquor for had become partners, family, and fellow champions for those who had no voice. Later that evening, they gathered in their private quarters for dinner, a tradition they'd maintained since those early days on Kepler Station. The table was larger now, often hosting refugees, business partners, or friends from across the station. Tonight, it was just the three of them, sharing the comfortable silence of family. "I got a message from Ambassador Thex today," Kess said, eventually. "The Rigelian Assembly wants to offer us a cultural preservation grant, 500,000 credits to help document endangered languages and customs. And Chief Engineer Martinez says the Colonial Authority is interested in contracting us for the new deep space stations," Zira added. "Permanent positions, full benefits, real stability." Kyle nodded, but he could see something else in their expressions. "What are you thinking?" The girls exchanged glances, a form of communication they'd perfected over the years. "We thinking about the people still trapped," Zira said quietly. "Like we were trapped, like the ones who coming here now." "Money is good," Kess agreed. "Stability is good. But there are others who need help, others who have no one to trade bottle of liquor for their freedom." Kale felt his heart swell with pride and love. They had achieved everything they'd dreamed of: success, security, respect. But they hadn't forgotten where they came from or what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. "So what are you proposing?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "We expand," Zira said simply. "More ships, more stations, more people helping people. We make Haven Foundation into something bigger," Kess added. "Something that can reach places where colonial authority cannot go." "It would be dangerous," Kale warned. "Going back to places like Kepler Station, dealing with people like Drax." "Danger is worth it," Zira replied. "If we can save even one person from what we experienced, then we save them," Kess finished. Kale looked at his daughters, for that's what they were now, officially and in every way that mattered, and saw the determination that had carried them through slavery, escape, and the building of new lives. They could have chosen comfort and safety, but instead they were choosing to fight for others who faced the same darkness they'd escaped. "All right," he said. "Let's change the galaxy." As they began planning their expanded operations, Cale reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd started as a simple engineer, living day to day with no greater purpose than keeping the machines running. One moment of moral courage, one bottle of synthetic liquor traded for 2 terrified children, had changed everything. The girls had given him far more than he'd given them. They'd given him purpose, family, and a mission that stretched to the stars themselves. In the end, he'd saved 2 lives with a bottle of cheap alcohol, but in return they'd given him something priceless, a reason to live that was bigger than himself. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere among them, other lost souls waited for rescue. The Haven Foundation would find them, help them, and give them the same chance at dignity and hope that had transformed 3 strangers into a family. The best investments, Cale reflected, were the ones that paid dividends in lives saved and futures secured. And this one would keep paying forward for generations to come.